This meeting of the Community Development Board is called to order on November 19th, 2024. Welcome, everyone. Please join me and stand for our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This board consists of 7 members and 1 alternate who are appointed by the City Council and serve voluntarily. I am John Quattrocchi, and I will ask the other members of the board and the city staff to introduce themselves, beginning on my left.
Andy Park, Aubrey Hodricourt, Mike Matrosario,
Jay Daniel, attorney for the board.
Matt Minich, Assistant City Attorney.
Gina Clayton, Planning and Development Director.
Diane Achinelli.
Andrew Hupp. Michael Boutsikas.
Please remember to turn off your cell phones so that they do not become a distraction during the meeting. Please also refrain from having conversations in this room so that we might hear all the testimony given today. To ensure a complete record of this board's actions, we ask that each individual wishing to speak, including the applicant, speak into the microphone at the podium in front of us. Clearly state and spell your name for the clerk. I will ask all those in attendance today who plan to speak to please rise now and be sworn in by the clerk.
Raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth throughout your entire testimony?
Agendas of today's meeting are on a podium to your left near the entry door. Also on this podium are a roster of the Community Development Board, the list of city staff experts, and their resumes, the board's rules of procedure, and the annual schedule of the board. Our first order of business is to review and approve the minutes from last month's meeting. Do I have a motion for approval of the minutes?
approve the motion. Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? At this time, there's an opportunity for citizens to be heard. Is there any person wishing to address the board on an item or a matter that is not on today's agenda? Seeing none. This board has adopted a consent agenda format, and the consent items are identified as such on the agenda. Consent agenda items are those items for which the Planning and Development Department recommends approval, the applicant is in agreement with the proposed conditions, and no written objections to the case have been received to date. Items may be removed from the consent agenda today by a member of the board, a member of the staff, or any person in the audience for questions or objections. I will read each item on the consent agenda, and if any person wishes to remove this item from the consent agenda, please so state or raise your hand, and we will remove it from the consent agenda. Items removed from the consent agenda will be heard in the regular order of the meeting. Items that remain on the consent agenda will be approved with a single vote as to each type of hearing. The first item today Item 1, case FLD 2024-08018/TDR 2024-08001-TDR 2024-08002 at 505 and 521 South Gulfview Boulevard, the receiving site, and 830 Bayview Boulevard, and 152, 188 Clearwater Drive, the sending sites. The owner is Decade Gulf Coast Hotel Partners, J.K. Gulfview. Owners of the sending site, Clearwater Yacht Club, Brightwater Blue Residence, LLC. Representative is Brian J. Unks Jr., McFarland Ferguson, located on the south side of South Gulfview Boulevard at the intersection of Hamden Drive. Requesting flexible development approval to add 45 overnight accommodation units to the existing hotels located at 505 and 521 South Gulfview Boulevard in the Tourist District and the South Beach Clearwater Pass Character District. The additional hotel units would be accommodated through interior renovations, and no exterior work is proposed. The project will exceed the required 419 parking spaces through the provision of new valet parking spaces of the upper floors of the parking garage and the existing parking spaces. Associations: Clearwater Beach Association, Clearwater Neighborhoods Coalition, Board of County Commissioners, Pinellas County School Board, and Clearwater Point Condo Association. Does anyone wish to have this item removed from today's consent? Yes? Yes, if you want it removed.
No, I want it on the consent.
Okay, yeah, so nobody's here to have it removed from consent, seeing none. Item 2, case FLD 2016-06018A-TDR 2023-05001 at 301 South Gulfview Boulevard, receiving site, 830 Bayview Boulevard, descending site. The owners are Gulfview Boulevard Owners LLC, from the sending site, Clearwater Yacht Club, Inc. Representative Catherine E. Cole, Hill Ward and Henderson, located on the east side of South Gulfview Boulevard, west side of Coronado Drive, and south side of 2nd Street, South Gulfview Boulevard. 1.54 acres is the receiving site. Requesting flexible development approval to add 25 overnight accommodation units located at 301 South Gulfview Boulevard in the Tourist District and the Beach Walk Character District. The additional hotel units would be accommodated through interior renovations and no exterior work is proposed. The project will continue to exceed the required 360 parking spaces. Associations: Clearwater Beach Association, Clearwater Neighborhoods Coalition, Board of County Commissioners, Pinellas County School Board, and Clearwater Point Condo Association. Assigned planner is Ted Kozik. Does anybody wish to have this item removed from today's consent? Seeing none. Do I have a motion of approval for the level 2 applications remaining on today's consent agenda?
I move to approve the two cases. Do I need to read the case numbers?
Yep.
Yeah, and Member Hardsworth, if you could get towards your microphone so we can
Oh,
hear
sorry.
you, please.
Yes, I move to have the two items on the remaining consent agenda for vote. First item is FLD 2024-0801, 8 TDR 2024-08001, TDR 2024-08022. Keep going on the, or just next one. Sorry. Case number 2 is FLD 2016-06018A and TDR 2023-0-05001.
I'll second.
Is that okay for the reading, Jay?
Do I need some, hold on.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Okay.
Yep.
We have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We'll now move on to the regular agenda. There are two types of cases that may be heard today, quasi-judicial and legislative. I will outline the procedures of each hearing at the beginning of the respective hearings. We are in order. All level two, we'll go for quasi-judicial level 2 cases. All level 2 cases, such as flexible development, are considered quasi-judicial hearings. In a quasi-judicial hearing, the Community Development Board reviews the application, the staff report, correspondence, and all evidence presented today and makes a final decision subject to appeal. This board has previously qualified all the city staff who will testify as experts in their area of professional training, education, and experience. The list of city staff experts and their resumes are in a handbook at the podium near the entry door. Any other professionals who desire to be qualified as an expert witness shall so request at the beginning of the case and present a resume to each board member. The board shall determine whether or not to qualify the person as an expert and in what field of study. At the beginning of each level 2 case, I will ask for anyone who wishes to request party status to come forward and state your reasons. Party status may be granted if the person requesting such status demonstrates that they are a substantially affected person. The board will then determine whether or not to grant party status. Then the case will proceed as follows. Request for party status, presentation by planning and development staff, presentation by the applicant, presentation by persons with party status, cross-examination of witnesses by planning and development staff, cross-examination of witnesses by applicant, cross-examination of witnesses by persons with party status, comments by the public, closing remarks by the planning and development staff, closing remarks by persons granted party status, closing remarks by the applicant, closing of the public hearing, discussion, and vote by the board. Put this aside. Our first case is a level 2 case today. It'll be in the opposite order of the items listed on items F. They are continued. The level 2 application is item number 2. Case FLD 2024-07017 at 691 Harbor Island. The owner is Brook Enterprises LLC. The representative is Brian J. Unks Jr. from McFarland Ferguson. Located on the east side of Harbor Island, approximately 650 feet north of Harbor Passage. Requesting flexible development approval to construct a 548 square foot dock, 95 feet in length, with 2 covered boat lifts as accessory to the detached dwelling use located in the low, medium density residential island estates neighborhood conservation overlay. The requested flexibility is for a deviation of maximum dock length and setback to boat lift. Associations, Island Estates Civic Association, Clearwater Neighborhoods Coalition, Board of County Commissioners, Pinellas County School Board. Assigned planner is Melissa Hawk Baker. Does any board member wish to disclose any ex parte communication on this case? Is there anyone in the audience wishing to request party status on this case? What did I miss?
Excuse me, we've had a request to continue this case until the March meeting. We received that request just probably an hour ago.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Unks, can we have a request from the applicant to put that on the record? If you don't mind.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Daigneault, and Planning Director Clayton. We confirmed non-objection from the neighbor to the north this morning through her attorney. About 30 minutes after that, we received an email from the city with the neighbor to the south's son rescinding her non-objection. And that is the neighbor where the setback deviation is requested, and that is probably admittedly the most impacted person. So in light of the southern neighbor's son rescinding his mother's non-objection, we've decided to redesign the dock to remove that setback request, which means we'll probably lose one of the 2 boat lifts. And we're also going to try to address any other concerns that we've received through the process. So that means we'll almost certainly have to go back to DRC, which means, we're hopefully going to resubmit by January 1. DRC would theoretically hopefully be in February, and then we would be hopefully ready for the March CDB, which is the genesis of that request.
And for purposes of the board, there isn't any requirement that you continue to a meeting certain today. You can grant the continuance until such time as the applicant and staff have decided it's appropriate for re-agending.
You okay with that?
Yes, sir.
Do we need to take a vote on
You
that?
take a motion, a second, and a vote.
I was going to say, either way, we're going to have to re-advertise it, so it,
As a totally new application.
well, there'll be too much time has passed,
Yeah.
yes.
Move to continue FLD 2024-07017.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Okay, all level 3 cases such as plan amendment, rezoning, or development agreement are considered legislative hearings. The Community Development Board reviews the application, the staff report, correspondence, and all evidence presented today and makes a recommendation to the City Council. For level 3 applications, the City Council makes the final decision. The procedures for all level 3 cases are as follows. Presentation by planning staff, presentation by the applicant, comments by the public, closing remarks by the planning and development staff, closing remarks by the applicant, closing of the public hearing, discussion, and vote by the board. Our level 3 case today is case TA 2024-07002, amendments to the Community Development Code. The applicant is the City of Clearwater Planning and Development Department, requesting amendments to the Community Development Code to establish standards for artificial turf, require landscape areas and front yards for residentially zoned properties, clarify the use of non-living landscape materials, and make other associated updates. Associations, Clearwater Neighborhoods Coalition, Board of County Commissioners, Pinellas County School Board, signed planner is Janie Lopko. is yours, presentation.
Okay, thank you. Jamie Lopko, for the record. Wanted to point out to the board that the ordinance, it's 9805, was inadvertently left out of your hard copy packets. We did have it posted online, available for public viewing. However, it was not included in your packet. You did only receive the staff report. So we did want to give the board the opportunity to decide whether they wanted to move forward with it without the ordinance being in their packets, or if we wanted to continue forward with the staff report and the staff presentation.
How long is the ordinance itself?
21 pages.
And you have a presentation for us today with it?
Yes, sir.
So, Jay?
So it's really up to the board at this juncture. You're charged here with reviewing the ordinance as part of your local planning agency responsibilities. If you've had the chance to do that, whether it was included in your packet or not, I would suggest moving forward. If you wish for more time collectively to review that, then I would suggest that you ask staff to continue this item and put it on the next agenda until such time as you've had time to review the ordinance itself. Or alternatively, you could, I believe there are hard copies available for the board.
Yes, I do have hard copies.
You have hard copies of the ordinance?
Yes.
You could recess briefly the meeting, 5 or 10 minutes, or however long you think is appropriate if you wish to review the ordinance, the text of the ordinance itself, if you have not already done so.
What's the position of?
I think a brief recess, and that way we can have a glimpse at it and then follow along with the presentation would be helpful.
If we find that it's too much to review, then we can make that decision when we come back. Is that fine with everybody?
And Mr. Chair, you can call that recess on your own. You can
Well-
pick a length.
We'll take a 10-minute recess if that's okay. And it's 1:14.
So for purposes of our record today, Mr. Chairman, why don't you take a motion and a vote on whether you feel sufficiently prepared to continue this hearing?
We have a motion to proceed.
I move that we proceed after review of the ordinance and presentation.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Thank you.
All right. So we'll get started again. Jamie Lofko, Long Range Planning Manager. We're here to provide amendments to the Community Development Code related to artificial turf and non-living landscape. I'll go over the proposed amendments, our timeline moving forward, and then we'll have plenty of opportunity for questions. So first, let's start why we have these regulations here. Artificial turf has become more popular in recent years. It's an alternative to natural turf because it requires less maintenance and less water. So currently, the city's code prohibits the use of artificial turf except for in our parks and recreation and our athletic fields. Those are the only two places you would be permitted to have artificial turf right now. Any properties that currently have it were done so illegally. And so in May of 2023, the city did start code compliance on several properties that had artificial turf installed illegally. Based on that, concerns were brought to city council about why artificial turf was not permitted. So in December of 2023, staff did give a presentation to city council about why the code is the way it is right now when it doesn't permit it, and then gave some benefits and concerns about artificial turf. And then the public was also given the opportunity to share benefits and concerns about artificial turf. After that meeting, city council did direct staff to draft regulations to allow the use of artificial turf within the city. And so staff has drafted the best possible ordinance to protect the environment while still allowing the use of artificial turf. And I will, well, for the public's benefit, the ordinance that was posted that you did not receive had the word draft on it inadvertently, so that's been removed. The one you have does not have draft on it. So this is not a draft ordinance anymore. All right, so we'll get into the regulations. The first one's a new regulations that we're creating for a residential landscaped area, which will require 25% of the front yard of a residential property to be a landscaped area containing living plant materials. So like the diagram on the slide is one of a standard interior lot, and where the blue area is considered the front yard. So 25% of that blue area would now be required to be a landscaped area of 25%. This would only be triggered under certain circumstances. So the first one is if you're constructing a new detached or attached dwelling on your property within a residential zoning district. 25% of your front yard would be required to be living plant materials. The second is if you're making improvements to the front yard of your property within a residential zoning district and you're a detached or attached home. So if you're making improvements, then we're going to ask that you improve the front yard to have living landscape material. And the last is if you're proposing a new installation or repair or replacement of artificial turf in your front yard. We'll then evaluate the front yard requirement. So then we'll get into the actual artificial turf requirements. There are several standards, and we'll go through each one of those one by one. The first one is our general and location standards. So the proposed regulations would allow the use of artificial turf citywide with the approval of a building permit. However, since artificial turf is not a living plant material, it cannot be counted towards the minimum landscaped area requirements in residential zoning districts. So for our location, artificial turf would be permitted on approved patios, porches, rooftop patios without a permit. Those are already impervious surfaces, and you can just put the turf right out there and glue it on top of it without the use of a permit. There are a couple of places where we would either not permit turf or it would need prior approval. So artificial turf may not be installed in a right-of-way or in a drainage feature unless otherwise approved by the city engineer. These areas have infrastructure in them, and the excavation and compacting required for artificial turf may impact that. So we want to make sure that those are reviewed. And if you are going to put artificial turf in a right-of-way, a city right-of-way permit must be applied for. Lastly, places where artificial turf is prohibited. Any perimeter or vegetated buffers required by our code, any interior or central landscape islands, and any area used for parking or driving motor vehicles. So artificial turf is not considered a living plant material, so our buffers and islands are intended to contain live plant materials, so therefore they would not be permitted there. In addition, artificial turf is not an all-weather driving surface, and so it could not be used for a parking or driving surface. So next we'll get into the design standards. That's for the quality of our turf to be installed. This includes the color of the turf, which is required to be a green, lifelike blades of grass, except for our parks and rec facilities and our athletic fields, where they can use color for maybe a team's logo or mascot on the field, something like that. The next thing is what we call the pile heights. The pile height is the height of the blades of grass. And so the minimum pile height for a residential use is proposed to be 1.5 inches. So the longer the blades, those are meant for low traffic areas. Residential yards, they're softer, more flexible, and more natural looking. We have a minimum pile height for non-residential uses of 0.5 inches. The shorter blades are meant for the high traffic areas like playgrounds, athletic fields. They're firm, they're durable, and they're easy to clean. The other thing is the face weight. That's the weight of the actual fibers of the turf per square yard. And so the proposed minimum face weight for all turf we have is 60 ounces per square yard. And the average for residential is between 50 and 80 ounces, with the higher number giving you a higher quality, denser, sturdier artificial turf. The average weight for athletic fields would be between 40 and 90, with 60 being recommended for sports fields and areas of intense activity. And lastly, for the safety and longevity, all artificial turf must be flame retardant, free of lead and PFAS, and provide a minimum of an 8-year manufacturer's warranty. All right, for our permitting, we're proposing to require a building permit for the installation of turf. The permit will be reviewed by city staff and our land resources, our development review, and our engineering for compliance with our code. So this section also allows the community development coordinator to establish what information will be required for this permit. So we're going to create an application, and it's going to detail the submittable requirements and the process for review and approval. The things that we may require are going to be something like a landscape plan or a survey, a tree preservation plan if there are trees on your property may be required, a scaled edge detail or cross section like you see, one you see on the slide, and then manufacturer specifications, which will include instructions for installation as well as the warranty. So a permit may be issued to a general contractor, an artificial turf installer, or a homeowner. But you note that if artificial turf, for it to be treated as pervious per our code, a general contractor or an artificial turf installer have to be the ones installing it. Because then they will apply for the permit, they will install the turf to the specifications, and they have to sign a verification form certifying the installation meets our code. Now, if a homeowner wants to do it, the artificial turf is going to count as impervious, and it will count towards the site's impervious surface ratio, or ISR. And I'll get a little bit more into that in the next section. But in addition to this, we are going to create an option that will allow the installation of up to 100 square feet or less without a permit. But it would count towards the property's impervious surface ratio, and it will be limited to one of those on the property. And this gives the property owner flexibility to put a small area out there for their pet or something like that. All right, so now we get into ensuring the quality installation of the turf and whether it be treated as pervious or impervious. So all turfs required to be installed per the manufacturer specifications. If trees are located on the property or overhang the property, a tree preservation is going to be required, plan's going to be required, so we can evaluate any potential impacts to those trees. We want to make sure that we restrict the area under the tree where artificial turf is to ensure the roots and overall health of the tree is not being compromised. Installations also going to be required to be designed to not adversely impact other properties or the right-of-way and follow historic flow. We want to make sure that it drains. So this can be accomplished through an under-drain system installed under the subbase or through a pervious installation. In addition, we want to deter live plant materials from growing up underneath your turf. So we're going to ask that you put a barrier between the artificial turf and living plant materials to try and limit the amount of debris and seeds that can get down on the artificial turf and encourage things to grow. To ensure turf stays in place and resembles a natural look, we want our seams to be nailed or glued, not sewn. And we want the edges to be trimmed to fit all regular and irregular shapes. The edges also must be tucked and anchored as per our manufacturer specifications. Also, if the artificial turf is going to be next to a seawall, we're going to ask that it be pinned and staked behind the seawall, not attached to the seawall or the seawall cap. And then after installation, we want the turf to be visually smooth and the grain to be all pointing in a single direction. So infill is the material you'll see on the slide. That's the material that they put on top of the turf. Serves as a ballast and keeps the turf weighed down and level and provides similar footing to a natural turf. It also provides a level of cushioning, maintains the fibers upright, and it extends the life of the turf. If infill is recommended by the manufacturer or proposed for use, it must be a clean silica sand or a sand-based product. The use of plastic pellets and crumb rubber is going to be prohibited, except for parks and recreation and athletic fields. Crumb rubber is commonly used to provide a safer surface in high-traffic areas when it comes to athletic fields and playgrounds. So it's starting to phase that out in lieu of shock pads, but at this point there are still some installations that will use crumb rubber, so we're going to limit it to the use of parks and rec and athletic fields. So artificial turf may be installed by a residential property owner, but it's going to count towards their ISR. So the installation has several steps that require knowledge and equipment to be done properly in order to be treated as pervious. So artificial turf that is installed by a contractor or a turf installer can only be treated as impervious if they meet these items. The backing of the turf, of the artificial turf, has to be dual flow or hole punched for drainage. The base below, we have a leveling layer on top, which is going to be 1 inch of decomposed granite or limestone. And then below that, there'll be 4 inches of subbase, which is going to be a washed granite or limestone that meets DOT specs. And then we're going to require the size of the stone to be 3/4 inch to 1 inch, and that the underlying soils below the subbase remain uncompacted. So they have to meet those requirements for it to be treated as pervious. So the contractor or artificial turf installer have to sign a verification form. They're going to certify that they installed it compliant with these requirements and that what they have done meets the definition of pervious. This is a professional assurance that the artificial turf was installed per the manufacturer's specifications and will have no adverse impacts on adjacent properties or the right-of-way. And that's the reason that we've given the pervious for artificial turf installers and contractors versus a property owner. The property owner is not going to have the knowledge and the ability to do the same installation that a professional installer would. So that's why we've distinguished between the two. All right, inspections. The regulations proposed for the city to inspect the turf in compliance with our code. So what we're going to do is have an initial inspection if there's trees on the property, and then a final inspection for all turf. We're trying to limit the amount of inspections because putting in artificial turf is a very short job. We don't want to say, stop halfway through so we can come back and look at it before you put the artificial turf down. So we tried to work with the installers to make it a more refined process for them. So in order to do that, when they put the turf in, we're going to ask them to submit things before the final inspection. And one's going to be a copy of their aggregate testing report to show that the subbase complies with what we've asked them to. They have to sign the verification form. And then the other 2 things are photos that we're going to ask them to take of the subbase material when it's put in, and then photos of the leveling layer when it's put in, so we can ensure that the materials that they put in match what the application says and they were put in per the specifications. That's what we're doing in lieu of requiring them to stop and come out and do an inspection. So we need those photos. And then, of course, photos at the end. We would like to see the finished product. Okay, now we'll move into maintenance. Artificial turf has to be kept in a green, fadeless condition. We want it free of dirt, sand, stains, odors, weeds, debris, tears, holes, seams, separation, wear, impressions, just about anything we can possibly think of to make sure that it stays as pristine as possible. This can be done through proper maintenance, which can be done includes rinsing to wash away pollen and seeds, and brushing it to keep the blades upright and protects against damage. Maintenance also includes making sure it continues to allow infiltration and the stormwater drainage doesn't adversely impact the adjacent properties and right away over time. So if our artificial turf were to fall into disrepair or needs repair or replacement, the owner needs to replace it with the same turf if possible, but if it's not available, something as similar as possible to look. They will be required to submit for a permit for the repair or replacement, and if for some reason it's non-compliant, say it's all the way up to a trunk of a tree and we didn't want it there, we would work with them to bring the property into conformance before issuing the permit. Let's see, the last section is dealing with artificial turf, the existing artificial turf. We have several properties out there that have our existing artificial turf. At this point, there's no way for staff to equitably identify where those properties are. There are side yards and rear yards that we just don't have access to. We won't be able to visibly see those. So there's no really way to really know the scope of how many are out there. So it'd be a large undertaking for us to try to do it all at one time. So we are proposing to allow any artificial turf that was installed before the enactment date of this ordinance, that it may remain if they do the following. They submit evidence to us demonstrating that it was installed prior to the enactment date. So if they've got an invoice or an installation saying the date of when it was done prior to the date, then that's sufficient enough for that. If they do have artificial turf already installed within a right-of-way, they will have to apply for an after-the-fact right-of-way permit and work with the city engineer to go through that process. And the last thing is all existing artificial turf must comply with the maintenance standards that we've created in this section. This allows property owners who comply with the above requirements to keep their existing turf as long as they maintain it.
Continue.
Okay.
Step forward.
Just note that an existing turf that remains is going to count towards the calculation of their stormwater fees, and it will also be considered as impervious surface, which could impact future improvements on the property. We are almost done. We have a couple other amendments that I wanted to touch on. We're creating a new section that would regulate non-living landscape materials, and that's shell, landscape rock, stone, and other inorganic mulches. These uses are not currently permitted in yards and landscaping, as those can be problematic and washed away and get into the city's stormwater system. So we are proposing to allow the use of non-living landscape materials, but we're limiting it. You can use it as a minor integral part of your landscaping plan. You can use it for a walkway in your side or your rear yard of a residential property. And the last one is actually a prohibition. We're going to prohibit the use of it within the right-of-ways, except for areas the city maintains, and it will be prohibited under the drip line of trees. And this last note is, as non-living landscape materials would not be considered a all-weather driving material, so it also could not be used for parking and driving. I just wanted to show you a couple of examples. The one with all the vegetation is the one where it's integrated into the property. And of course, the one on the right is what we're trying to avoid. We don't want to see the whole front yard being a non-living landscape material. We'd like to see it integrated into some living landscape materials. All right, the last little bit is just cleanup amendments. We're correcting typos, reordering the sections, providing some clarifications, updating section references, and there are we're adding a provision under the general landscaping standards to add a requirement for existing single-family and two-family lots that they have to come into full compliance with tree requirements when they do an addition or improvement to the lot. And then definitions, of course, we are related to artificial turf and non-living landscape materials. We are clarifying organic mulch. We're adding face weight, landscaped area, landscape material, landscape rock, inorganic mulch, natural turf, artificial turf, non-living landscape material, pile height and shell, and we're deleting landscaping. And additionally, we're adding a definition along with diagrams to show for front yard. And the last thing is a clarification for the use of organic mulch, that we're going to limit that similar to the non-living landscape materials to be a minor integral part of your landscaping. And then the last thing is after this ordinance was published, we had discussion with an industry expert as well as some staff, and there are two small changes that we want to highlight on this that we would like to include in this for your consideration. And that is, they're both in 31203E11, and you'll see in B, the highlighted area. A leveling layer is an inch of a softer material that you put on top of the subbase to make it a more level layer before you put down the turf. And what we have found is this is more common in a non-residential use, under an athletic field or a playground or something like that, not so much within a residential use. So in order to make it more flexible, more user-friendly, we would like to say for non-residential installations only for that portion of the leveling layer. The remainder of the items would still be relevant to residential. And the other one is in D. We right now have the size limit of the subbase rock to be 3/4 inch to 1 inch. And what we have found is, you'll see above in C, that FDOT has a number 89 stone. That is typically a 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch. And so in order to allow that as a stone usable in the subbase, we needed to change and lower that requirement to be 3/8 of an inch to 1 inch for the subbase materials. So those are 2 additional changes we would like to include for your consideration. And lastly, our next steps, we are here today at the Community Development Board, and our next step is City Council, which will be Thursday, December the 19th for first reading. And as long as there's no substantial changes, we'll move on to second reading on Thursday, January the 16th. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jamie. I'm going to start. You mentioned it, and I read it, but I lost where it was in here. What initiates, if you're doing an addition to an existing residential, you just mentioned it a second ago, that you have to come into full compliance of?
That's for the tree portion of it. For any single family and 2-family, if you're doing any addition or improvement to the lot, you will be required to bring it into conformance for the tree provisions.
For the tree provisions?
Yes.
And there's a percentage as far as an improvement, or is it any?
Not for that portion of it. The required residential landscaped area,
Yeah.
that's the 25%. That's where you get triggered by any one of the 3 things. That is a new construction,
Yep.
if you're improving your front yard, or if you're putting in artificial turf. One of those 3 things has to happen for the 25% to be triggered.
All right. But let's go back again with the tree. Help me out here again.
So it's 2 separate provisions.
Yeah.
The 25% is for residential properties. If you're building a new house or an attached dwelling, new construction, 25% of the front yard has to be living. If you're doing an improvement to your front yard of an existing house, we'll look for the 25%. If you're putting artificial turf or repairing or replacing artificial turf in your front yard, we'll look for the 25%. The other provision is for any existing single-family or 2-family lots. And if you're doing an improvement to the property or an addition to the property, you will be required to come into full compliance with the tree requirements of the code.
That's an addition to the structure.
Yes.
That's what you're saying. And that addition had a stipulation on too, was it 200 square feet? Or
Yeah,
was
I
it
believe it
a
was.
percentage of the residence or the building, or? That's what I read in there and I missed it.
There's one of the first provisions on here. Yes, it is 200 square feet. Addition to the primary structure or a new accessory structure exceeding 200 square feet. So if you put a shed down that's bigger than 200 square feet, or in addition to the house that's more than 200 square feet,
Would
then we'll
trigger.
look at the tree requirements.
Okay, and your living plant material of 25% in the front yard,
Yes.
is that sod considered living plant material or not? Sod,
Yes.
Yes.
it is. On section 31204, non-living landscape material. Help me out if I'm reading this quickly and right. C, D, the use of non-living landscape material in the right-of-way shall be prohibited, fine. Non-living landscape materials shall not be installed under the drip line of any tree
Yes.
on the property or any tree with an adjacent right-of-way that overhangs the property. So non-living, you've got, this definition is shell, landscape rock, landscape stone, inorganic mulch. Shell, landscape rock, and so you're saying under the drip line of any trees in the city of Clearwater?
Yes, sir.
How in the world, I mean, you're talking about landscaping and houses all over the place that have lava rock? Is that considered
It's a
inorganic?
landscape rock.
It's pervious, though.
Shell is what we're saying? I mean, shell, I mean,
Yes.
how many structures are we gonna get into here? And I'd love to talk about, I mean, how in the world are we gonna enforce that?
It will be a case by case basis. I mean, it's been something that we've been trying to enforce, since recent
Scott's
past.
here. Let him.
Yeah,
Scott, you
love
wanna-
it here.
I think some regular, what about regular mulch?
We're gonna ask.
Good afternoon, Board. Scott Perlman, City of Clearwater Planning and Development. The main reason for prohibiting stone and shell and whatnot from under the drip lines of trees is that absorbs a lot of heat, and that is, in a sense, just almost, if you want to call it that, it fries the roots of the trees, okay? If you've ever walked on, a paver deck out in the bright sun, or you've walked on the sand on the beach, you realize how hot it is, and that is not good for the root system of trees.
Organic mulch is okay, though?
I'm sorry?
Organic mulch is okay?
Organic mulch is great. We prefer that.
I mean, I'm just thinking of practicality of something, I'm just bringing this up, I don't mean to be, but we're talking massive oak trees throughout this city where people have landscaping underneath and very nice subdivisions and homes, and there's shell and all kinds of landscape rock and things in these areas. How, I mean, you're talking, I mean, I think it's an endeavor that it's just an uphill battle all the way around to be able to do that.
Well, I don't know as though our plan is to go out and find all these sites with this shell or rock under trees. I think it's to prevent further additions, is my understanding.
Well, I think that needs to be stated in there or something. I don't know how you, I mean, I still don't know how you enforce that. People just say they had it down there if they put it in there and I mean, Google Maps is not gonna, we're gonna be looking to that to enforce something like this? I mean,
Well,
I'm just thinking of our own neighborhood, how many houses have shell around palm trees already existing and oak trees, and, I mean, it's major.
And it's
I mean,
white.
it's-
It doesn't absorb heat like a white shell that's very prevalent. I mean, it's not hot.
And under the drip line, you've got the shade
I mean,
from
you're
the
talking-
tree.
And drip lines are
So
different
that doesn't
for every
make
tree,
sense to
too.
me.
I mean, I understand the ideal part of it, but I just don't think that this is just the Pandora's box. I mean, I just don't know how in the world, who would be enforcing this? I mean, our code enforcement is limited as it is to so much. I mean, how in the world? I mean, if you turn in one person, the next person's gonna say, I got 10 people down my block, you're gonna hit everybody on that to change their landscaping?
As stated, I think the goal really is to, move forward and prevent this. I mean, Scott is a certified ISA arborist, and so he is giving his professional opinion on things that you should not do with trees and tree preservation. Is there any other information you want to provide them about the research that's been done, about why you don't, anything more you can add about why we think it's not a good practice?
Well, I think the main point to make is there are fine absorbing roots in the upper, say, 6 to 10 inches of the soil. Those are all the roots that absorb the water, the nutrients, things of that sort to keep the tree alive. And you increase the heat in those fine absorbing roots, and it causes stress in the trees. Now, when I say stress, it may not be something that shows up immediately. Trees have stored up energy, so this may be something that, I don't know, 5, 6 years down the road, depending on the species of the tree, say it's a live oak, that can tolerate the stress a lot better than, say, a laurel oak or a fleshy-rooted magnolia. And one clarification, I'm a former certified arborist. My certification lapsed when I took a new position with the city, but I'm in the process of re-upping that.
Again, I'm not arguing that it's for the benefit of the tree. I'm all for it, everything else. So I'm just looking at the practicality of what's gonna be sitting in front of, I mean, knowing what our code enforcement deals with. You can take the most prestigious neighborhoods in the city of Clearwater and go in it, and you're gonna find, we're gonna have instances, unless I am just way off, and people think I'm nuts. And the other thing is too, I mean, we're talking about shells, and help me if I'm wrong here, we've got city-owned properties that have palm trees on it that have shell all around the base of the tree, and we're saying we can't do it?
Well, you certainly can make a recommendation to city council that this be stricken from the ordinance due to your concerns about the enforceability of that. Or you could ask that we come up with some language for clarification that this is somehow moving forward on new development, if you're concerned. I mean, I think we put this in here because we found that a lot of times with new home construction, we go out to do the landscape final, and all of a sudden we're seeing rocks around all the landscaping and things that have not been on the landscape plans and been approved, and based on, all the information that our arborists have about this practice, we've had sort of a battle of, dealing with it. So we wanted to put something in the code to clarify that. So if you are supportive of it, you could ask that we clarify that it be for new home construction, or however you want to, or that it be removed from the ordinance.
I don't see how you can how you're gonna definitively grandfather it in, and if I have shell around my trees and I sell my house, is it still grandfathered in, or is it, I agree with you that logistically, I just know where my neighborhood and my kids' neighborhood, there's some serious gorgeous landscaping out there. And then are the people gonna be fined on top of the fact that they have to rip out all their landscaping and put it back in again? Are there gonna be liens against their property for it?
The only one that can impose a lien on a property is the municipal code enforcement board.
Right, well, that's what I'm saying, are they gonna get fined if they don't get that out of there?
Scott, can you correct the record? Like, right now, the requirement is that you use organic
Right.
mulch.
Currently, our ordinance doesn't allow rock, shell, anywhere.
Right.
It prohibits it.
Except for in
extreme
washout
washout
wells.
areas. Say there's a gutter that has a big spout and you want to put, instead of putting mulch there, you want to put gravel or shell there. And I'm not saying it doesn't exist within the city right now, but what I'm saying is our code currently does not allow any form of shell, rock, gravel to be used as mulch.
Well, we use it in our own city properties, Am I wrong on that? On the beach and in other areas around palm trees, am I the only one? Am I missing it in certain areas? I mean, I'll have to pick it out, but I'll like to see what the rest of the board has to say.
I mean, I don't think we would necessarily, to your point, ma'am, I don't think we would necessarily make someone remove all their landscaping. At this point, generally what happens is if you use shell or rock as a mulch, we say, please remove that and use an organic mulch such as pine bark, pine straw, wood mulch.
But you're not gonna force them to do, what, I guess.
Well, let's say we have a commercial property that's had scheduled a landscape final inspection.
Right, it
If
would have to be, but existing, you're gonna leave. Because pine bark and some of the things that you just mentioned, people don't tend not to ever use pine bark anymore, simply because that becomes a mess. Any kind of rainstorm or heavy rain, the pine bark ends up floating down the road into the storm system, because it has nowhere else to go. It floats everywhere. So that type of thing is kind of, you're telling, from that kind of standpoint, okay, put pine bark everywhere, that's gonna end up in your wastewater plants or in your storm system.
Yep.
I mean, there's other, you can use pine bark, you can use cypress, you can use
But they
hardwood mulch, you
float.
can use.
They still.
Right.
Yeah,
Anything
they
will
still
float.
wash
We
out.
have a problem right now with Public Works with the shell from shell yards floating into the system, which causes major damage, is the way I understand it, to the infrastructure.
Yeah, I don't see how this is enforceable. I
And
just
our
don't.
Public Works Department and our city engineer is here if you need to hear from her that they are opposed to shell, the use of shell in the front yard because they're finding all over the beach where we have a lot of drainage issues, shell has
Oh, no, I
infiltrated
understand that, yeah, I've been in your
the
plans.
system, so.
Anybody else have any comments?
Well, I think that Ms. Clayton's recommendation that it get clarification that applies to new construction, so it's a standard they can apply going forward, is kind of the beginning of where I think you were going to and what this conversation is leading to. My concern is, like, I'm thinking about my house. I've been in there for 25 years, and the drip line under, while there is no mulch here under my trees, the drip line under the oak tree in our backyard is a lot different now than it was 25 years ago. And this is going to be a moving target in some respects. So either way, it ends up being problematic from an enforcement standpoint. Ultimately, it would be. I think it's a good start to say, let's deal with new construction, and then that gives us time to see how it works in practice. But I think that's not going to be the final end result of this, because if I have a landscape area in the backyard and all of a sudden that tree is now 10 years later and it's overlapping that landscape area, I've got an issue that I didn't have before. But it would have applied to my home because my home was built when that ordinance was in effect. So that's kind of, it still ends up with a challenge down the road, but that's a can be probably kicked down the road a little bit so they can see how it works in practice. That's my thought.
You also mentioned previously installed, let's say somebody did it a number of years ago, and there was a criteria for kind of grandfathering in. I think one of it was a receipt of the, my concern, the average homeowner, without getting into it, it's the enforcement part of this that I applaud the city for trying to implement this. I think it's a good step. My concern is some of the requirements are going to be tedious for the average homeowner, or even, and what is that going to create as a, neighbor on neighbor on neighbor. I would recommend, because again, I think this is a good amendment in theory, I would recommend either further review or stripping it down, but I'm concerned it's creating enforcement requirements that the city will not be able to keep up with.
I have a small question relative to that is, on page 11, item 10, you're treating a homeowner differently than a contractor.
Sir?
Can a homeowner pull his own building permit and build his own home,
Yes, sir?
but he can't put in his own turf?
No, sir.
That doesn't comport.
He
I
can
mean,
put his own turf, but it's gonna count as impervious.
I understand, but he can build his own house, and it's not treated as impervious.
But his house is impervious. His house is gonna be on a concrete pad.
Yeah,
and
but
there's-
his skill set, you say he doesn't have the skill set to do this, I disagree. I think the homeowner should be allowed to do it. I think it's an
Wouldn't
owner's
the
step.
same inspection requirements of the contractor be put on the homeowner?
Well, they have the same inspection requirements. I mean, the stipulation is the artificial turf installer and the contractor are signing that verification form. That is their professional certification, that they put it in to be a pervious installation.
But if I understand correctly, they don't have the same inspection requirements because they don't have to follow the contractor requirements. It just counts as impervious. So it's not the same inspections, correct?
They'll still look at we'll still have to do the inspection beforehand, we'll still protect the trees, and we'll look at it afterwards. But we're not going to look at the photos for the subbase and look at the leveling layer and things like that, because it's gonna be impervious. We just wanna make sure they installed it for the manufacturer's specifications.
Well, they have to build the house to specifications, right? What's the difference? I'm just not,
Yeah.
this is a low-level installation compared to building a house.
I apologize.
I'm sorry, I just think the standard is if I can go build my own home, go through all the inspections and do all of that, but you're saying I can't put in my turf grass and meet these specifications to be pervious? You know, it just doesn't seem fair to the homeowner.
Well, I mean, let me explain to you. I went through a lot of research in doing this. I've looked at communities all over the country and in Florida to see what are they doing, how are they doing it. Some people just do it based on a policy. Like the city of Tampa, they looked to try to do their ordinance. They couldn't find one in the state of Florida that was relevant enough. And the ones in the West, of course, are different than what we're looking for. So instead of creating an ordinance, they've created a policy. And they have a document, an application, and requires the specifications, and they have the same verification form that we do for installers and contractors for it to be considered pervious. Most people that have a policy or a ordinance in place, they say all artificial turf is impervious. That was my other option, is to say it's impervious always. But in order to try to be lenient and allow people to have the artificial turf and still be able to enjoy other things on their property that are impervious, we gave the option for pervious, but we wanted to make sure it was done right, that we don't impact our drainage systems, and that we're not causing problems for our stormwater system and for our neighbors of runoff onto their property. So that was the intent of allowing a pervious installation, but we wanted to make sure that a professional was doing it.
Relative to that, I understand the affidavit in terms of the general contractor's signature, but for the landscaper or the other type person who could sign, what type of licensing requirements would they have to be able to sign that, aside from the general contractor?
Artificial turf installers do not have any professional licensing.
Okay. So the professional that's, and just so I'm clear, I actually applaud the city. I think they're trying to
No, I agree.
progress. I don't want the negativity to come across as like unappreciation for your work, because I'm for this in spirit. But if I understand correctly, so then I guess if they don't have a license, what's the difference between a homeowner signing it as a professional and a Bob's Landscaping signing as a professional, as an unlicensed?
Yeah, it's a question of liability, isn't it?
I don't think it's Bob's Landscaping that we were doing. It is artificial turf installers, like companies that have artificial installers.
But who is
Do
that, I guess, is my,
Yeah, they
is
don't
my
have to
question.
be
Like,
licensed
what,
or-
so like, I'm a general contractor, if I had to sign it, I have a license that says, for the person that is signing it as a, whatever the definition is, they can sign it, what is the difference between that person and the homeowner signing it, I guess is what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, like a turf installer, does he go to turf installer school and does he get a certificate? I mean, I don't mean to make light of it either.
They
but
do
I'm
have a
just- I'm
synthetic
trying to
turf
drill
council.
down to it.
So here's my conundrum. I was getting ready to order 5 cubic yards of shell to put down on my side yard because all my grass died because of the canopy of my oak tree and bamboo that my neighbor parked along my fence line. And so I have artificial turf sitting over at Carillon that's been sitting there for a year and it's only an inch. So I guess I'm gonna have to throw that out and forget the shell, but I thought the shell would be a great pervious base to it instead of buying granite and the silica or whatever you guys recommend in terms of being able to perk a lot better than that.
Well, that would be
material.
for a professional installer to be considered pervious. If you as the homeowner wanted to do it, that's why it's impervious, because you're not guaranteeing what base you're putting underneath of there.
No, I understand, but then I have the tree canopy that I can't impede
Yes.
upon as well. So I guess I'm stuck with 2 puppies running around in dirt that brings it into the house.
For trees, it's not the same. We're not saying it's all the way at the drip line, no turf. We're going to ask for the tree preservation plan, and our arborists will look at it, and they'll stipulate a distance from the trunk of the tree that we want you to preserve.
I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but I just want to understand, so what would count as a professional installer signing that document?
It's somebody that would have an artificial turf business. They would have I'm not sure if they have a BTR.
Depends on where they are.
Yeah.
Maybe we have an artificial turf business person here who's worked with us, given us feedback on the ordinance, and maybe he can address some of those questions about what they do, you know, in terms of training and the type of equipment that they have and all that would give you.
My concern as a
confidence.
citizen is, and again, I am for this, and I really applaud it. My concern is I don't want to put my name to something that arbitrarily boxes people in or creates enforcement requirements that were unintended or the city is unable to fulfill. So,
I will say, early in the process, we had a lot of discussions, and Tara Kivett is here with engineering, and engineering really wanted to have an engineer design the installation for this because of this. And so I think we tried to come up with this as a happy medium, people that professionally install artificial turf as a business and general contractors, to ensure that it would be pervious. So I think that's where we were caught. You know, there's 2 other options here. One is don't count any of it as pervious, and then the other option is to require everyone to do an engineer plan, because it is like installing a structure. So those are some other options you could think about. Tara.
Tara Kivett, city engineer. And Gina explained it very well. Originally, we did say, oh yeah, we want signed and sealed plans, because that's what we want, right? But that would also prohibit a lot of home installers. So this was kind of a happy medium, because as Gina already mentioned, and Jamie, you know, we're very concerned about whether if we're giving them credit for being pervious, you know, they need to show it. And also the resources and as Jamie mentioned, the timeliness of doing inspections. So unlike building your home, we're not inspecting it as frequently and in the same manner that the building code would require. And so because of that, we want some sort of affidavit, some sort of commitment, and residents can do it themselves. It just cannot be considered pervious. You know, and we're looking at, in the near future, redoing our stormwater, how we do ERUs, our individual residential units, and how we do our stormwater utility fee. And some municipalities take such a deep dive that they're really looking at, right now ours is standard, just a single family dwelling, it's 1 fee. But if in the future, we could be looking at that tighter, and your percentage of ISR would come into the factor. So that again ties back to how important it is on whether that area is considered pervious or impervious. And we really need verification, if you want it to be pervious, that it truly is. So without an engineered signed and sealed plans, that makes it difficult for us to do. Hope that helps clarify.
I have a couple of different questions, if that's okay. How are you guys treating dog parks and that sort of thing? Is that okay to use artificial turf for that? Dog parks or dog runs, that kind of thing?
For parks, right now, turf is allowed to be used.
Okay.
But for something like in your personal yard, right now, it would not be permitted. But you could either do the 100 square feet or less.
Right.
You don't need a permit.
Sure.
But if you go over 100 square feet, then you would have to get into getting a permit.
Also, you mentioned that stone is not allowed to be put down. Can it be used like for auxiliary parking or something like that? Because I've seen that.
Not for parking areas. It's not an all-weather driving surface, so you can't use non-living landscape materials
what I
for
was-
parking or driving surface.
I was going to piggyback on letter F. I didn't get to it, and that's where you're
Yeah.
going with that. Non-living landscape materials not considered for permanent parking, driving surfaces. So all the gravel and stone driveways, this is for residential and/or commercial, correct?
Yes.
So we have a bunch of it already out here.
They're only very old installation. The code since '99 has never allowed gravel,
Yeah.
stone, shell, parking lots, driveways, has not been permitted
Right.
since the adoption of the new, it's not new
I saw the
anymore,
85%
old
rule for
code.
churches and that sort of thing. I understand.
I can't hear you.
So I see the 85% rule for churches and that sort of thing. I just didn't know if that extended it anywhere else. Okay.
That's odd because in 2006, if I remember right, I put in for the city of Clearwater in one of your parks, a gravel driveway. I mean, it was designed. It's like a waffle that you put down your base material, your silica silica, and then you put down this waffle material, and then you fill the waffle material full of rock. And that is the driveway and parking area at one of your parks.
I think, as he said, there is a limited provision for some overflow kind of parking that's
No,
allowed.
this
I'd
was
have to
the
look at
only
that.
parking. This is the only parking at that park.
So I guess on that note, like Joe DiMaggio, for instance,
I-
I assume somebody's familiar with Joe DiMaggio, like,
Yeah.
if there's at some point a permit pulled by the, for the city to do work there, how would that parking lot be dealt with?
I'm not familiar with the existing parking lot. Any new parking would be required to be compliant and not be gravel.
Well, they did it a few years ago. They improved it.
Yeah.
They improved it a few years back after the last major, I think it was after Irma. I think they improved, brought in some leveling, and it's not a paved parking lot. So, I mean, I'm just saying, whatever we put on the residents, we have to take on ourselves too. I mean,
I understand
I know
that.
it's time and
Our
money, but I mean,
previous
it's
city
hard.
manager, Bill Horn, used to say always that our city projects should reflect what our codes require.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, from enforceability.
And I don't want the city to pay for Joe DiMaggio.
No.
I practice with my son twice a week. It's just we're creating requirements. I don't know. I'm inclined to encourage, I'm usually for pushing things through this and progress and moving forward, but I'm encouraged to take a little deeper look at this before. I'm just hesitant to put my name on something that's going to create unintended enforcement requirements. And I rarely try to hold things up here. And I think you guys have done good work, but I think a little more tweaking could be wise.
Would you like to consider us continuing? Would you like to continue this to the next meeting and give us some areas that you would like us to look at further?
I would recommend that. I would also encourage the board, myself included, to not be difficult in today's meeting and then provide no feedback and be sitting here 30 days from now having the same conversation. So I'd be willing to make a motion for that and offer some feedback, because again, I think it's generally a good idea and progress for the city, but that'd be my recommendation.
I would definitely encourage allowing at least the public speak, and we do have an artificial industry expert here that he may be able to provide some insights to help you before formulating recommendations.
Yep.
Aren't most types of turf impervious that I've seen?
The
out
turf
there?
themselves is usually pervious
Pervious,
because it will
right.
either be the dual flow or have hole punching
Right.
it. It is usually the subbase that is where you get into the problems with the infiltration.
Right.
Which you can't easily inspect or see once it's down.
You can take a
Right.
picture though
Yes.
and submit it.
I would offer for consideration for D, E, and F to be used towards new construction. Section 3-1204, I think that's what you were leaning towards, Mike.
Yeah.
Don't want to put words in your mouth. But
No, I'm agreeable there. I would like, if they have an industry expert, I would like to hear what they get in way of certifications and what exists, because a definition of what a artificial turf installer is for city purposes would avoid some ambiguity from somebody saying, yeah, I've done one. I'm an
Well, not just
installer."
that, but if I was a homeowner, the first thing I'd do is calculate my ISR, and if I could get it in with help, then I would technically have the ability to put in a substandard installation that the city doesn't want.
There is a synthetic turf council. They are, I think, an international organization. There's at least here in Florida, and they do have a certified synthetic turf installer program that they have. And we actually considered requiring it to be a certified synthetic turf installer. But it's limited how many of those are available. So we opted to just,
Yeah.
Well, it's like lightning installers, we require them to be certified. You just don't want anybody putting in lightning protection for you.
If I was to do a 300 square foot putting green as a turf in my backyard, would that be illegal if it was a half an inch?
right now, yes, because it would not meet the pile height.
I thought half inch was the pile height for putting green.
1.5.
That is something that we have been discussing with the artificial turf installer, because there are some situations for canine grass as well as putting greens that are historically shorter than the 1.5 inches that we have on residential. So that is something
Soccer.
that we are discussing.
Like a activity field in your backyard for your kids playing soccer, et cetera? I mean, inch and a half is a little onerous.
Yes.
So is that set in stone, or that's up for debate?
That is what the ordinance states right now. It is not something we had proposed to change, but it is something that was brought to our attention by the artificial turf installer, and it's something that we were going to look at.
Maybe we should talk to somebody.
I'd like to make a motion to continue this to next month's meeting with the public statement that I think the city has done a good job, and this is a good start, but some additional feedback would be, I'll wait to make a motion after.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to
We
have
hear
a public
public comments.
hearing.
From the expert.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you're gonna continue the public hearing, that's fine, but bear in mind, your next step in your process is comments by the public, which means you need to take comments by all the public. I would suggest
now.
that to you. If the board is just finished giving their feedback to the city.
You okay?
I don't think, so we're not gonna continue it?
No.
Oh.
Go ahead, explain again, Jay, if you would.
You can continue it right now if you wish to do that. It's perfectly within your power to do that. If you're going to move along with your hearing, perhaps I shouldn't use the word continue again. If you're going to continue on moving
on.
forward with your hearing, I would suggest that you take public comment, which is the next step in your
We can always continue it
hearing
after that as
process.
well,
You can
too,
continue
correct?
afterwards, yes.
Our final vote could be a vote for
Continue.
continuance.
Yes.
After we get public
Okay.
comment.
Thank you, Jay, as always.
Not at this point. I was going to wait till the public comments and then ask for clarification afterwards. I think that they might have something different. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I will make sure I fully understand before we leave here. Is there any other questions of me?
Nope, thank you.
Got it.
Thank you.
We're now going to comments by the public. If there's anybody in the public that would like to make a comment on this matter, please come forward. Please come forward. Oh, please come forward.
Hi there. I'm Chris Powell, and I own Forever Lawn of Tampa Bay Synthetic Grass. We were pleased to be the ones who did the sound amphitheater and did the grass that's out here up on top of the hill. And we do a lot for Pinellas County Schools, St. Pete, Parks and Rec, as well as a lot of homes. in the area. And so first, I started the company 16 years ago, so we've been doing business all up and down the coast of Florida. I've also done work I have a dealership in Miami and also in Jacksonville and Orlando. So across the state, we've installed a lot. So we've done a lot of sports fields and others as well in this area. So we're familiar with the different types of products and the different base installation methods, the Synthetic Turf Council that Jamie mentioned. We're part of that. My wife's actually on the executive board of the Synthetic Turf Council, and it's international. So it is responsible for setting up standards, and you can get a certified synthetic turf or STC certified installation expertise. So you can get that certification. I share your point that it's not like a GC license where you have a professional certification to do installation of turf. There's a lot of people doing it. But the STC does publish standards, and it does have a membership group that's part of developing the approved practices. So it is a good organization. I'd also say I want to applaud Jamie. She has reached out to us and involved everybody in coming up with these standards. That said, there's probably 3 areas that are in the ordinance. One you started mentioning. There's specific products for specific purposes, like a putting green. It's not even a 1/2 inch pile height. You want the ball to roll on it. If somebody wants to do a putting green in their backyard, it seems like they should be allowed to do that. Canine grass is another product we have. It's about 7/8 inch pile height. It's short so you can pick up the poop and you can clean it up easily. It doesn't harbor everything. It also does not require any infill. So it's what's used in a lot of the public dog parks and humane societies as well as backyard runs. So I think there has to be a provision somehow that says for backyard special purposes, those requirements, or side yards, those requirements aren't enforced. For front yard, that's where the pile height may make sense. I want to be cognizant of the time. The other thing that I'm concerned about is the drip lines of trees. You pointed it out. The drip line's a big area, and you wouldn't even have any parking lots or anything if you followed the drip line rule. I mean, they're usually in an island, and then you have concrete and asphalt around it. So it's a difficult thing to enforce. And so there's a couple of things with the pile heights. There's a couple of things with the drip lines. There's some base construction, which she addressed in a lot of the stuff that we talked with after the ordinance was released. And so with some changes, I think it gets there. But I wanted to make myself available for questions too.
Thank you. We ask questions to the public?
Sure.
Since we feel like it. Anybody have any questions? Go ahead.
Relative to the drip line, putting turf in, if it's pervious, like the dog material you referred to,
Yeah.
how would that affect the drip line?
So again, I'm not an arborist. I think the discussion is if you did things in isolation of a tree and what's in the best interest of the tree, I understand the comment of the drip line. There's a use of life. There's the ease of use of life. Parking lots is a good example. Roads that are all within the drip line of trees. So there's trade-offs made in that. When you have a backyard and it has a giant oak tree, to tell them they cannot do anything but mulch in their backyard seems like a big ask. It's going to render them not able to use it with their kids and the infants that crawl on the ground. And so there's a lot of cases where turf is a great answer for that. And coming up with a way that it works with the trees is a good objective. It's not that we're against trees. We're not against grass. I mean, there's a lot of places where natural grass is a great option. There's a lot of times when it can't withstand the use and the abuse, like dogs and kids and that happen in the backyard. So there's a real case for it. It's not that we're saying, hey, replace all grass with synthetic grass.
The argument is that it retains heat. Do you have any?
So, yeah, I can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah.
So the blades themselves, if you took a grass and you made it white, it doesn't get hot at all. You also can't look at it because it's like snow and it reflects. You have to wear sunglasses, but it's all based on color. So the darker the grass, the hotter it's going to get. The lighter the grass or lighter color, the less hot it's going to get. But the heat that it gets is a surface heat. It's due to direct sunlight. When you take away that sunlight, a tree, for example,
Yeah, that's where I'm
it
getting at.
cools within 8 seconds.
Yeah.
So the blades themselves are not dense enough to retain heat. It's not like a paver block or concrete or even the plastic playground equipment, the swings and the slides. They can retain that heat because the density of the plastic is higher. The blades are so small that as soon as you take away that light source, it cools within 8 seconds. So it doesn't actually retain that heat. It's a surface heat. It will feel hot to touch it, but then even if you hold your hand or foot over it, you're taking away that light source. So under the trees, it's a non-issue. And we would rather have
That's what I was
shade.
trying to figure out. I mean, as long as it's pervious so that the water can get to the roots. If
Yep.
it has air and that sort of thing, I would think that would be okay.
Yep, so I'll go ahead and speak to that because we've done a lot of research on the trees. The turf is pervious, so even the minimum rating would be 37 inches per hour. When you take 37 inches per hour, we're gonna have other problems if we get 37 inches in an hour. And so our canine grass perks in excess of 3,000 inches an hour. So it's a sieve, it just goes through it. It has more to do with the base that you put underneath the turf. So if you use crushed concrete, it's going to harden and it's gonna restrict that water flow. If you use washed granite, washed limestone, some people use shell in other areas, then it's permeable underneath there. The other thing that an arborist will tell you is they don't want weight on the roots. So we're coming up with some solutions to go under the turf that, for example, bound wooden mulch. Bound wooden mulch has a binding agent with it. It's what is used around tree rings in parks and in settings because it's unitary. You're not getting it floated around, but it's still permeable. It's also very light. So would that be a good option to put over roots, bring the turf up over it, and get closer to the trees so that you're striking a compromise in the use of the area, but also not limiting what the tree can do? So it has to do with the base and what you use underneath it, whether you're going to get higher permeability or less permeability.
One last question. So there is no, at this moment, there's no license for what you guys do yet?
There is not.
Okay.
There is not. You can get STC certification for installation, and most of the manufacturers require certifications to install their products, but there is no license per se that you have to have.
And I know you all just were looking at that. Is that something you would, was there some reason why you didn't take that?
That we didn't require
Yeah,
them to
right.
have that. I think we looked online and we just didn't find that there were very many companies that had that in the area, and it limited your choices to like one or two contractors here locally. Maybe we had wrong information, but we couldn't find it. It was, there were a lot of companies out there to choose from, so we also didn't want to seem
Well, it's
like we were.
easier if you don't have to be certified to do something.
Well, he said something, if I may jump in for a moment. The last thing you said is that the manufacturer is required to be certified. Are there other certifications other than STC, or do manufacturers say, here's our list of certified installers for our product? Because if the manufacturer whose product it is has a certification for it, that starts to take care of some of the analysis. You're not sticking with STC. You're saying somebody knows how to put down this particular product, because that's going to make the warranty valid, and it has to be warranted for 8 years.
Right.
So all of a sudden, we're looking to that without having said it yet, but that might be a definition we could add to the ordinance.
It's a fair discussion. You have what you're describing. So manufacturers, be it Shaw, Forever Lawn, AstroTurf, any of the major manufacturers will have, here's the list of our certified installers in the area. You also have the opposite. You have independents that are not aligned with any one manufacturer selling whatever turf the homeowner wants. They likely would not have that manufacturer certification.
In your industry, would somebody who was an independent installing turf in my yard, would the manufacturer honor the warranty, or would they not honor it if it wasn't installed by somebody certified?
You get two different warranties.
Okay.
You get a product warranty, and I think you would have that. You also get an install warranty.
Okay.
So most of the time, there's a 2-year install warranty, covers base,
Doesn't
nail
end up
boards,
sagging
tape.
and get it.
Yeah, and then the products are 8 years or more, up to 15. Some have 20-year warranties now.
And the focus here, just to kind of tied together seems to be more on the installation. While the 8-year warranty, that's already covered. Your ordinance draft already has the 8-year warranty in it, which is the product. But the focus here is for them to get that installation warranty, it's going to have to be installed pursuant to manufacturer specs, which is what's going to get you that permeable base versus a non-permeable base.
Right. And the manufacturer of the product, to be fair, they're not always going to care what base you use. They're selling the product.
Yeah.
It's going to be the installer who does that.
Okay.
So,
It's not a perfect solution, but it gets us potentially a little bit closer if we're looking at requiring that they be certified as an installer for the product. But again, you're also limiting what the consumer can go out and get, because maybe somebody who's perfectly talented, capable, doesn't want to be bound to a particular manufacturer, so they're not going to be on one list over another, and they're just independently doing it, but they're still qualified. So
Right.
That's the challenge that we've got. Are we creating, through this ordinance, another classification of qualifications that require a license of some sort?
I actually had an idea. I just wanted to see what you all thought about this because I know I'll be helping out draft this thing when it comes time. What if we did like for a certified artificial turf installer is defined as someone who is in the business of doing that, who provides an installation warranty to go along with the installation. That way, you know, we were concerned about, you know, how contractors, they have to put their license on the line when they do their work. This would be something similar because they have an installation warranty. So if this particular individual or entity was in the business of installing artificial turf and they provide an installation warranty, maybe that could be the definition for what a certified artificial turf installer is?
I think that's a good beginning. The concern is the gap that he just pointed out, where the manufacturer to certify somebody as one of their installers isn't necessarily going to be worried about what the base is as much as anything else. But our concern and the distinction that the staff brought up between an owner doing it and having somebody licensed or certified doing it is solely for the credit for permeable versus non-permeable. It's solely for that reason, and not for anything else. It's not that you can't install it, you just don't get the permeability credits if you should need them for your property. So any homeowner can go and install it, and it's not going to be the issue in that context. It's whether it's considered permeable or not. It doesn't limit a homeowner from going and installing their own turf within the requirements of the ordinance otherwise. So that's the reason why I say get this partway there. It doesn't really say is it going to meet what we require for permeability, and that's where you got to kind of bridge that gap, and that's really the issue. Because if we come up with that, then an owner might be able to qualify for that, but I'm not certain that works. It's tough.
Is the 100 square foot like a one-off? In other words, they do it 100 square feet 1 year, and 2 years later they do another 100 square feet? How does that?
No, I think the reason why originally we had 50 square feet because a lot of our lots are so small, it's a lot of space in the yard, but I think we ended up landing on 100 square feet, just like we would for a shed that doesn't need a permit.
But it's not like contiguous where they do it 1 year and then 2 years.
Yeah, no,
later.
it's a one-time thing. That
Okay.
was the intention.
All right.
So as it would stand, you're gonna still, regardless of what the product is you put in, Fred's lawn, he's gonna give you an 8-year warranty on it. And then the installer, whether or not they're certified through some kind of an institute or class or whatever, or by the manufacturer, is gonna have their standalone warranty for installation for
Likely.
whatever period of time. And then the homeowner or whatever is gonna bet that that guy is still gonna be in business in 6 months.
And so is the city, because the city is accepting
So
the
is the city,
verification.
I mean, you have no,
and that's true, I think, in most industries,
Yeah.
but,
Yeah.
yeah.
but this is, to me, this is a little bit more, I don't wanna use the word sketchy, but I mean, you could have every lawn service out there that, you know, opens up on any given day and changes hands over and over that,
You could,
You know,
you
it's-
have, but there's reputable companies and then there's
Right,
not.
no, that's
Right.
what
It's
I'm
an
saying, yeah.
industry.
This one is not as regulated, like rough, certain are regulated a tad bit more.
Fair. It's
Going
not
to-
regulated.
Just quickly, so, and I'm sorry, John, real
No,
quick. I
that's
just want to make sure I understand. So you helped for some of the language? I'm trying to hear, as a member of.
I was the expert that's referenced in there, and Jamie and I have been talking throughout that.
Okay.
And then I've tried to be honest with her when there's things that come up that it really provides a rub for
So are
us
you
as an
speaking in
industry.
support of the amendment as is?
Well, with changes.
Okay.
With changes. And the specific changes I'm talking about are for the pile height discussion, it disallows some things that are needed. You gotta be able to do putting greens and you gotta be able to do other products.
So I do think it should be clarified, Mr. Powell's not an expert for the city. He was retained by homeowners who were
Yeah.
code enforced on back in April of 2023. So the genesis of this is the 20 or so homeowners who got code enforcement violations in April of 2023 came to me, and instead of litigating over the interpretation of the current code, we approached the city about a legislative fix. And so our expert has been available to the city staff throughout the process, but it's not something that he's representing the city, he's not representing the city.
Okay.
He's representing the homeowners that have been code enforced against.
Appreciate that clarification. I thank you. We're just going to keep moving along. If there's any other questions for Scott right now, if there's anybody else in the audience that, I thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If there's anybody else in the audience that would like to speak on this? Seeing none, closing remarks by planning and development. Jamie?
The only thing before we get into how you want to, direction you want to handle us, is just to provide clarification about the drip line of trees. There are two different things that we were talking about. I don't want to make sure they're not confused. Right now, the regulations limit that you cannot have non-living landscape material under the drip line of trees. When it comes to artificial turf, there is no stipulation there. It says if you're going to put turf underneath a tree, you have to submit a tree preservation plan. That doesn't mean we're not going to allow the turf to be there. It means based on the species of the tree and the size of the tree, we're going to set a 5 feet, 10 feet, or whatever barrier that you have to be away from the trunk of the tree. So it's not a stipulation that, no, you can't put it under the drip line of trees. That's not where we're headed with that. But we are going to ask for a tree preservation plan so we can evaluate the trees and make the best decision to try and preserve that tree based on the species and size.
Does
of it.
that go with any kind of artificial cover or just the turf?
Any work done under the drip line of a tree typically requires a tree preservation plan.
Okay, so other people could submit your rock around the tree, right?
That's correct.
Typically when it's excavation. If you're throwing something on top of the surface, that's not usually going to require a permit. When we look at artificial turf, it's just like you're putting in a driveway. You're excavating that much of the ground and disturbing that much. That's all the feeder roots of the trees. So we want to make sure that we're disturbing as little as possible to make sure that tree's still going to survive.
So laying rock or shell on top of the ground, not excavating it, could be approved.
It's not allowed for the ordinance right now.
Okay.
So that's what we're talking about now.
So a tree preservation plan, who writes that? Do you have to hire an arborist for that, or?
Not necessarily. Scott, you want to address that?
I just a
Can
question.
homeowner- Yeah, can
I-
homeowner-
What,
How much is that?
what rabbit hole, or what was it gonna cost?
Thank you, Evan.
Generally, a certified arborist would prepare the tree preservation plan. Currently, anything that is excavating near a tree would require what's called a clearing and grubbing permit through the city of Clearwater. It's a very nominal fee, $10. Allows our arborist to go out and assess the situation ahead of time and say, hey, I think this is going to impact the tree, this is not going to impact the tree. If it's going to impact the tree, we want to make sure the extent that it's being impacted is in line with what a certified arborist would allow. Now, a lot of times if it's just a single-family home, which is mainly what the residential is, and it's just one or two trees, we have staff arborists who will kind of evaluate the trees and make that decision. If there's root pruning required, which a lot of times we would require root pruning rather than some piece of mechanical equipment coming in, digging in the ground and pulling roots off all the way from the trunk, we'd rather have a root prune line done where they're cleanly severed and perhaps a tree barricade put in there so no one else goes in that critical root zone of the tree. The other comment I'd like to make is It's great that the artificial turf is permeable under a tree, but in order to get that permeable, the way I look at that diagram is we're removing about 6.5 to 7 inches of soil to make that turf permeable. And as I said before, you remove 7 inches of soil, you're removing the majority of the absorbing roots of that tree. And again, as Jamie said, we're not saying you can't put artificial turf under a tree, just we want to evaluate it and see how close you can get to that root zone.
Lot to
Anybody
digest.
else? Pardon me?
It's just a lot to digest.
It
It's,
is.
you know,
Yeah.
I think
I'm going to look for direction from the board on this. I mean, as far as conversation, as far as moving forward on it, I mean, I just think, I'm standing by what I talked about before, those few items would be my thought. I'll let them go with that. Is that the end, Jamie? I'm sorry. Or do you have any more questions before I move on and close the meeting? Any other questions for planning and development? You're also the applicant is the same. So I'm about to close public hearing unless you tell me differently.
Yeah, I think you have some
If
options
there's
here.
any other questions before I close? Okay, we'll close for the public hearing, a discussion and vote by the board. I'll start out with, my comment is that if we continue this for further information if need be, or if we have a vote, my thought would be to, if a motion's made, those few items to be for new construction only. But
I suggest we continue it
I,
and come up with ideas.
I agree. I think we need to, 10 minutes to read this, and just this discussion has prompted more questions in my head that I would like the opportunity to at least email them in, and so we don't have to regurgitate this again.
yeah, I don't want to tear it apart today and offer no
Yeah.
feedback, because I'd like to see this pass in some form.
I agree.
So I'd make a motion to continue this. My preference would actually be to the January meeting.
Yeah, me too, because I'm not going to be around.
Because I'd actually
Yeah.
like to provide some feedback and not just be a naysayer today. So I'd make a motion to push this vote to January.
Second.
Yeah.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you for your efforts.
Thanks for doing that. That was gonna be-
No, that's not.
Do you mind if
We're
I
going
ask a
to-
clarification question?
You may.
I understand we're going to continue it to January, but are you going to be providing me input on your questions, or how do you want me to proceed with making changes?
Individually, obviously, anybody on the board can direct emails to you, correct? And I think I had a couple changes.
Yeah, so not to each other, of course.
No.
And also, you've heard the feedback of the board members here at the meeting today.
Yeah. I think when the minutes are put together, though they're not going to write that detail, the audio transcript of the hearing today would be helpful.
And the item that I wanted was already stated on there, but, I mean, if anybody else has anything further, they can direct it to you, but the minutes will reflect, I think, the comments. But if anybody individually, my direction is that we contact you directly.
Clayton.
Thanks.
I guess I would just suggest if maybe we could have you here, because, you know, if there's not consensus on some of the things, I don't want Jamie, based on what one person
Right.
says, go down a rabbit hole that the rest of you all don't have concerns about or don't want us to make change. So is there any way we can at least summarize the areas that you have concern? And then, of course, we can go.
We can surely try.
You know, we can rewatch the meeting, but can we kind of get a little bit more direction about what you want us to look at?
Well, could we add something in there to the fact that if we're not going to do this in the December meeting, and with the holidays and everything coming up, to get questions to you, say no later than January 5th? Our meetings are usually, what, the 20th or something?
But we have to make sure any changes don't require us to re-advertise
But I mean,
the
if
ordinance
we, because
title.
I'm just thinking, if you get everybody's questions by a certain date, and then I may have a question that's very similar to your question. They may all meld together, and we may have a lot of 10 questions, but it may boil down to 3. that are different things that we're thinking in our heads. I just didn't know if that would help to have like a drop dead date for questions.
You know, the other thing you can do, Ms. Clayton, is put it on the
That's what I
December
was
meeting
thinking.
agenda as a director's item, so that y'all can discuss it in something akin to a workshop setting, so the entire board is here.
That's what we were just saying. Maybe at the December meeting, we could, under director's item, have workshop, and then,
Would the city find it helpful, though, if some of us have feedback to provide that as soon as possible?
sure. I just don't want us going down a rabbit hole if there's not general consistent
Yeah, which-
on, one issue.
What
So-
she's saying is, one member doesn't speak for the board,
Exactly.
and this doesn't want to send the staff creating ordinance drafts and revisions,
And then the other
if that expresses only the will of one member versus the member as a collective body.
Thank you, Jay.
And I think what's really important for us moving forward is, if nothing else, even if we all can't reach a consensus on exactly like what changes to make, just to have your comments of the board in general, so that way when city council makes the ultimate decision, they have all of your opinions on it, and we can all kind of work together. And I'm sure we'll make some changes at that point too. So even if we have your comments and not necessarily have been able to incorporate all of them into like a revised ordinance, just having the comments in itself for the city council to consider is very imperative and helpful as well. So keep that in mind.
Can this be in Word format? Because it makes it real easy to make comments.
It's a Word document, yes.
It is Word now? I mean, can we?
Right now, you only have access to a PDF that was posted online, but I'm sure we can
Well,
email out
I
a
can
Word
do the
version.
same thing on the PDF, I guess, so.
Can you
I'm just curious.
send an email out to everybody with the Word doc?
Sure.
So we
I can
can
have Alba send that.
come up with our thoughts?
That would be great, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could even send it out with track changes already set, and that way everybody knows who's commenting.
We don't want you all working in the same document. You can't do that.
No.
No,
Never mind.
Nope.
How about we
That's what
come
we
back
said.
in December and discuss it, give you an opportunity, you have the ordinance, and then we can discuss it at December, refine it, and then we can move forward with the actual revisions then.
All right, I think we understand each other.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
so we will get email.
We can email it to you. You have a hard copy now, you can review and all, but we'll send that out to you electronically, sure.
Thank you.
Now move on to director's items.
I'd like to bring up again, we brought up last time, we didn't have enough people to vote on it, and that's to open the meeting with prayer. I like God's guidance on our decisions that we make, and I know they used to do it previously. We do it in city council, we do it in public chambers. I don't see why we can't do it here. So I'd like to make that motion that we can do that.
Does anybody have any comments at the moment? We're going to decide one way or the other. I'm going to look to Jay for a little advice on this too here, because I know there's,
So, yeah, it was taken out of your rules for a reason, and I have the greatest degree of respect for the reasons that it was there and also for those that it was removed. As your attorney, putting a prayer back in the meeting at any level is going to create some level of legal exposure. Presently, with no prayer, you have zero level of legal exposure. So as your attorney, I say, okay, the level is zero, or I can raise it. I would not be doing you good service if I told you that you should increase your level of legal exposure unless there was an identifiable and tangible trade-off for assuming that risk. For that reason, I recommend that you don't do that, don't add a prayer. The meetings are running fine, and I understand where Board Member Mastroserio is coming from, but as a legal matter, it creates establishment issues, it creates First Amendment issues, it creates equal protection issues. And again, I'm not always adverse to creating legal risk when there is a trade-off. I don't see it here.
and
But these legal risks that we're talking about are already in place at other places. So, you know, I
They are.
understand what you're saying.
They are.
Take an easy way out, but realistically, as far as I'm concerned, I'm taking the hard way out because I'd rather have God's blessing on my decisions than I would trying to worry about if somebody's gonna take offense to it.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a, you know, obviously, there's competing interests. I would rather not go to the city council and say, we just cost you a whole bunch of money in attorney's fees.
So I
For
mean.
that reason, and the way these cases are brought, they're typically under section 1983, chapter 42 of the United States Code, they're civil rights cases. They come with, even though there may be no identifiable damages, they'll come with a mandatory fee award. Civil rights lawyers don't necessarily work cheap.
But
So
that's-
it'll be expensive, and yeah, I recognize that, and again, this is not meant to be
Well, that's okay.
confrontational.
It's, yeah,
The fact that other people assume risk, frankly, means nothing to me from a legal perspective.
Right.
I think, I think it's a insufficient justification to absorb legal risk on your behalf. I want to go to the city attorney or the city manager and say, you know, hey, we put in this prayer and we got sued and we got nabbed and here's your bill. I don't think that's a great stewardship of the city of Clearwater taxpayers' public funds.
Well, as Mr. Mestersoyo stated, and I want to hear all sides because I'm sure I could take all the prayer you want to give me. But I'd like to hear, because we're putting the city at risk if we were to put this on, correct, Jay? I mean, it's the city that is going to be absorbing and defending the case. I'd like to see if the city has any opinion on it. If legal, I want to put you on the spot, but I know it was brought up last meeting, or if we want to bring that up or to get a city response, or if we get direction from city council, if we can incorporate that into, I know we can do it ourselves, but you know, maybe that's where the direction needs to come from. But does the city have any opinion on it now as far as?
I briefly discussed it with the city attorney a couple of times, but I think I'd like to discuss it a little bit further if it's something that we are very much considering doing.
Would you be willing to bring that back to the next meeting as well, too? Something on that?
I could certainly bring that back.
Mike, are you good with that right now?
Yeah, that's fine. I guess in the back of my mind, the first thing I think about is, we'll look to them to be, city council hires each one of us. They have it. What makes us not, what makes them not susceptible to a court case or whatever? So, I think if it's good, but anyway, but I'm more than happy
And
to
if
wait.
anybody else has anything else to add to that at this point, or do you want to wait, or?
I like the idea. I'd like to get feedback from the city on it. I understand everything Jay's saying. I have this conversation with my clients all the time. My chosen field of work is being an attorney, and talking about risk is what I do all day long, it seems like. And I understand what Jay is saying, and it makes, we are unfortunately in a world where things have become so toxic, it becomes a problem. And while I think that your suggestion is not a good one, a great one, because it does help to calm people down and set a tone, and perhaps even a tone for civility. We don't have that big of an issue with civility in these meetings, and so I haven't, in my mind, it's great. I think it's an incredible symbol to put out there, but then I'm not certain that it adds a whole lot to it either from the standpoint of the risk, which is where Jay was going. And that's kind of where I'm trying to balance it out. I would like some input, though, because I do think that it's something that is worthy of consideration. I mean, we all have, not all have different faiths, but I know that probably not anybody else on the board that's Greek Orthodox, but it's a Christian-based faith. And you sit there, and then you run into the issue of what should the prayer read and be like, so it's inclusive. And then when it gets, the prayers I've heard at other meetings that I've attended on behalf of my clients are so watered down, so they're all inclusive, that they have no personal meaning to me whatsoever. And I don't know that adds a lot to me, okay? And or if I get here 5 minutes earlier and I think to myself and meditate to myself and, for the right guidance and make the right decisions, I'm doing myself a better job than a watered down prayer could do for me otherwise. I'm just trying to lay it out there for how it happens and how these tend to fall into place and actually get practiced, and that does not practice religion.
Yeah, that's something that my gears are kind of trying to say. What kind of prayer would we be looking at exactly? Like a non-denominational? Will we be switching off between different religions each meeting? Like, do we have any idea?
Why don't we get some input from the city attorney's office in our next meeting, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
Everyone's okay with that?
Unfortunately, I won't be able to be at the next meeting, so I'd really like to be able to vote. If it can be held off until January, that'd be great.
Well, if we could have some feedback, and we'll hold the vote off.
Okay, thank
Okay, I'm fine with that. Yep, I think it should be a full board that decides on that as well. All right, anything else from directors?
Yes, we got sidetracked.
Yep.
Under the director's item, we had put on here a discussion of the potential use of an electronic CDB agenda. For some of our members who've been around a little bit longer, we've discussed this over time, and it's really taking us a while to get this worked out and on track. We have worked with the city's clerk's office, and thank you, Rose. We have kind of figured out how we can make this happen and use the Granicus system, which is what the clerk's office uses for city council and the other boards. So we will be moving in that direction next month. We will have a demonstration for you to show you how it will work in Granicus. We are also getting you iPads that you can bring to the meeting, so if you need to pull up something, you can. And we'll be going over how to use those, I think, at the next meeting. So we wanted to tell you this is coming. We'll give you the preview next month, and then hopefully in January we'll start with doing that. But essentially, you know, we'll have probably the first page of your staff report will be the cover memo like you see in city council, and then we'll attach the plans and the staff report to the agenda item. We think it'll be better for the public to find, because a lot of them are used to going to Granicus instead of going to our CDB page and finding it that way and navigating through Acela. So I wanted to tell you that. And then the last thing is I wanted to let the board know that I am retiring. Today is my last meeting. My last day here will be December 6th, and I just wanted to thank you all for all the years we've shared together and all the board members before you. It's been quite the career, and thank you for what you do on a monthly basis. It's not an easy job. So thank you.
Thank you, Gina.
Congratulations. I think I can say that we're all sad to see you go, you know. And,
We have a great team here right behind me, so
I know.
none of this is possible without them.
Well, your support of the board has been tremendous, and your commitment and dedication through the years to the city has unequivocally made the city a much better place because of your service. I can honestly say that. I wish you a long and healthy and happy retirement.
You're here.
And with that,
I couldn't have said it better.
at 2:56, we're adjourned.